welcome back to Out of the Box with Christine, the podcast for conscious entrepreneurs, where I, Christine Blosdale, get to bring to you, the conscious entrepreneur, some master teachers in all realms of life: health, wealth, love, prosperity, abundance, and you name it. If it's about making your life better, we're going to be talking about it on the show. Stay tuned. It's going to be a great episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Out of the Box with Christine, the podcast for conscious entrepreneurs. And today I am super excited because I have the podcast lawyer. Yes, the man himself, Gordon Firemark, who is an entertainment attorney that helps artists, writers, producers, directors, and podcasters achieve their dreams and do it legally and covering your butt in many ways. And I am so happy to have you on. And Gordon is also a fellow podcaster as well. So welcome to Out of the Box, Gordon.
Hi, Christine. Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to talking.
Well, not only are you an entertainment attorney and you've helped a lot of people in many aspects of entertainment, but really your most recent forte, I guess you'd say, and specialty is with podcasts. And I love to find out what got you interested in podcasting, what got you interested in also helping people that are podcasters make sure that they are legally covered as well.
Well, I think one of it is I just love the sound of my own voice. But
you have a fabulous voice. I was just going to say, as a producer, if I just heard you like in the grocery store, I'd tap you on the shoulder and go, you need to be in radio or podcasting.
It's funny you mentioned that. I had an experience a few years ago. We had moved to a new community far out in the suburbs from Los Angeles, probably about 60, 70 miles from the community where I grew up and went to high school. And I was in it was a Barnes & Noble bookstore here in our local community. And I was having a conversation with my wife, and this woman comes walking up to me and says, "I heard you from across the store, Gordon. It's me, Shannon. We went to high school together."
Wow, you had that same kind of
Hadn't
voice
seen
in
her
high school?
25 years, and yeah, I had the deep voice as soon as I hit puberty. You know? So,
well, you can also do voiceovers. You know that.
Yes.
Or do you do voiceovers?
I have, yes.
Okay.
I had a career in radio and television before I went to law school. So,
where were you in radio? What station or what area?
It was mainly television. I was a line producer and sports. You know, I had a truck and a crew, and we would voice our own promos and things like that quite a lot of the time. So,
you've been. This is what I like too, is that you've been in all different aspects of it. You have a bit of history in theater as well.
Yeah.
You want to tell our listeners a little bit about that?
You know, my origin story actually goes back to kindergarten. I'm 5 years old. I'm going to a K through 12 school in the Boston area, in the suburbs of Boston. And the high school kids were doing their production of Oliver. And they brought us in to see a dress rehearsal. So this kindergarten class sitting in the dress rehearsal, the lights go down, the curtains go up. And I had tunnel vision for the next 2 hours. I was in the moment with that, and I was interested in the tech side of it more than the performance side of it, to be really honest. I mean, I loved the story, but and so I come home raving about this experience to my parents, who were theater goers themselves, and they took us as kids. They took my sisters and me to see shows. By the time I got to junior high school, we had moved across the country, and I was starting to get into some sort of low grade trouble with my friends, and for some reason, the principal of the middle school pulls me aside and says, "I need you to run the lights and sound for the school variety show." And that was the beginning for me of doing the behind the scenes tech. I became a sound technician primarily in high school. That was my thing. Got a job working professionally at a local theater my junior year in high school, and did that through high school and into college, where I started as a theater major, and then because that was a performance-oriented program, I shifted into radio, TV, and film production. And that was the beginning of my career, and only discovered the interest and aptitude for the law stuff in my senior year in college, when a professor sort of pointed it out, and I laughed and thought nothing of it, till the Writers Guild went on strike. And here I was trying to work in television and film.
Yeah.
There was no work. That's when I said, okay, maybe I will try that law school thing.
And here we are. And here we are. And
Yeah.
the breadth of work that you do when when you're representing clients is quite vast. I know we're going to be focusing in on a particular favorite subject of mine, which is podcasting,
Mhm.
but you cover a whole wide range of issues in entertainment and new media as well. You want to explain some of that to our listeners?
Well, I started my career, and about 30 years ago. It was film and TV. There was music stuff as well, but I shifted out of music. The music industry is a different kind of sleazy business, I guess you could say. So I focused my early career on television and film, but I always had that passion for theater. I always kept finding my way back to theater, and so I have represented playwrights and composers and producers in the theater space. And then, as we were starting to see the convergence of traditional media with the digital stuff and computers, podcasting, YouTube, those kinds of things naturally became something I was paying attention to. And being a techie geek and liking to play with my toys and that kind of thing, I just sort of naturally fell into it. And I started marketing my law practice using a blog, but then I realized, well, this podcast thing is really cool. And so
And you
I
have the
was,
voice of a god.
well, thank you. Anyway, I was invited to be a guest on some podcasts for a while, and then I was a recurring guest on this one where I would just answer legal questions for filmmakers. And that sort of, when the host of that show decided to go in a different direction with his content, I said, well, I'm hooked now. I got to do this. And so I started my own show. That was in 2009. So for the last
Wow.
12 and a half years, my co-host Tamara Bennett and she's a music lawyer in Texas, we got together, and once a month we do this roundup of legal news for folks in the entertainment industry.
I love it. I love it because it is constantly changing as
Yeah.
well. Well, and I come from a background of radio. First, I was doing print
Yeah.
and online. Remember that little thing called America Online?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
You've got mail.
you've got mail. And then whenever you had to go on to AOL, you'd hear that,
Yep.
that ding, ding, ding. I was lucky enough to be, I, I fell into it. I really did. An entertainment writer for AOL. I was in California working on New York time, so it'd be kind of crazy for me in the mornings. But I did a column called The Daily Fix, and I did it through a cartoon character because it wasn't Christine doing these movie reviews and interviews with celebrities. It was this cartoon character. And so the cartoon character was doing all of these interviews, and very saucy, kind of a Hedda Hopper,
Oh,
martini, toting, and, a rebel, so to speak. She would get invited to these things in Hollywood and she would just dish the dirt. And so, and that was really fun because that was like an alter ego. So not me, right?
yeah.
She had a waist like this, and hips like this. And so, so I was lucky enough to have that opportunity. And back in those days, AOL was it. I mean, that was the hot ticket.
Yeah.
And then, and then actually when 9/11 happened, my whole career and life changed. I said,
Hmm.
who cares who Britney Spears is dating? Who cares who Angelina Jolie is seeing? Who cares what they're wearing? Really? What's going on in the Middle East? What's happening? Why, I didn't know anything. And I think
Hmm.
as a lot of Americans and people around the world, that day really shook them up and changed them. And I was in Los Angeles one time just driving, and I was channel surfing as you do in traffic because there's nothing
Back
else to
when
do.
people listened to broadcast radio instead of podcasts in the car.
Remember back in the day? This was about almost 20 years ago,
Yeah.
19 years ago. And I found a really amazing radio station that was not commercial, no corporate sponsorship. It was all community sponsored. So it
Hmm.
had that authenticity, it had that realness.
I'm going to guess
And
that was KPFK.
yeah, yeah, that was KPFK. That was almost
Nice.
20 years ago. And then I was a producer and a writer, but I fell in love with sound and
Hmm.
with the voice and what you can do, the emotions that you can bring out. It's such an intimate art, and that's with radio, right?
Hmm.
And I didn't even know about podcasting. I didn't have any idea, didn't even have the concept of doing a show on YouTube. I was just in the studio. I was kind of stuck in the studio with the light, with that on-air light.
Yeah, yeah.
And and then and then since then, having the opportunity to bring amazing interviews with people like yourself. I like to have master teachers come on and get them on the podcast show. But now it's not only the audio podcast on platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, Amazon is getting into the act, of course, but now with YouTube, that's the way to reach people. And it is, this industry is exploding. And your timing is absolutely perfect, Gordon, because so many people, I'm talking to so many people are wanting to create a podcast, or they're just starting out. And the reason why I wanted to have you on, long story short, I'm going on and on, really wanted to have you on so that you can at least let people know that there's some things that they want to make sure, some boxes they need to tick when considering having a podcast show and having guests on and all of that. So let's dive into that, shall we? Let's dive into podcast land. First of all, there is such a huge need for you, because I just saw a report the other day that there's like over 2 million podcasts right now.
Last I saw, it was approaching the $2 million number.
Sunday Times, the New York Times Sunday edition, it came out that 2 million.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, that number is sort of skewed by the number of people who start and do an episode or two and then never show up again because they realize, oh, this is actually hard work.
There's a lot of work involved. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's a big number. It's growing, and if you think there's 2 million shows, the number of episodes out there, that is the potential to hurt people's feelings, reputations, to infringe on copyrights, trademarks, all those kinds of things. And that's the stuff that I am really focused on helping creative people to create, and yet do so safely and respectfully in ways that will keep them out of court and happy. The technology has happened such that it's never been a more level playing field. I mean, you and I, we're both sitting, and I presume you're in your home, or similar, and I'm sitting in my home office where I've got a computer and a microphone, and I know how to connect it all up. But basically, it's pretty easy to make media. I can do a YouTube video, I can do a podcast recording, I can publish an ebook if I want to, all those kinds of. So it's very easy to make content, but with that simplicity, that ease, so many people are doing it who have no background. You and I have backgrounds in media production, so we've learned the ropes and the rules and how to make sure we're getting it right as journalists or whatever. But there's so many people who don't have any of that information, and so I've sort of been making it my purpose, my mission, my crusade to help people understand so that they don't hurt each other and wind up in hot water. So I've got an ebook.
And you're right, with this great freedom and great creativity, ability to be super creative, comes a responsibility as well. And so
I hear Spider-Man in there somewhere.
Yes. Well, I'm a little Darth Vader as well.
Oh, there you go.
but
with great power comes great responsibility. Absolutely.
Of course. And so, and that also means, I mean, even as a radio host, when I'd be so aware of what I was saying, not to the point where I sounded scripted, because I never was scripted, but also aware of what my guest was saying, because what my guest says, I'm also responsible for.
You're the publisher. If you don't catch it and call them out on something that might be false, that hurts somebody's reputation, you're as almost as responsible as they are for
and to give you an idea of how I think I should have more gray hairs than I have. I actually produced Roseanne Barr for about 6 months, a radio show.
Wow.
And if you think that I wasn't nervous every single time the mic opened up, I love her because she's actually extremely, extremely intelligent and creative. But with Roseanne, you never know.
There's no filter.
There's no filter. And so I would just be sweating, just like
Yeah.
oh, please don't say anything that's going to get us in trouble.
But that's what makes her so engaging, but it's also what makes it risky. And so, yeah, you as the producer of the show had a obligation to
Well,
exercise a level of care.
with FCC regulations in the States as well, our poor engineer was on the button, just the dump button, just in case something came out.
Yeah.
Same thing with Ed Asner. I did an interview with him. The very first thing out of his mouth was a profanity on air, and I just said, because I said, Ed, how are you doing it? He's getting up there in age, and he's like, I'm fine. Why did you do that? He goes, what? But let's go into some of those things that begin, especially beginning podcasters, people who are just starting out may not be aware of. I know one of the most amazing things that you actually provide as a service for people is your guest release form.
Yeah.
And I am grateful for that because I use it as well. And it's a fantastic form. But this is really important if people are going to have guests on their show. Tell the listeners and the viewers why it's important to have that guest release form.
Well, thank you. This is actually sort of the front end of my crusade. This is the tip of the spear to get things legal. Every single guest who comes on anybody's podcast or show should sign a release form. Now, in broadcast radio, that really isn't a thing. People don't generally do that. And this is one of the major differences between terrestrial radio, good old-fashioned, over the air, and podcasts, is that when it's an over-the-air radio show, it's happening in real time and then it's sort of gone. I mean, the word is ephemeral. Now, there are air check tapes and there are recordings of what's gone on and so on, mainly so that the station has evidence if they're ever accused of something, those kinds of things. But podcasts are evergreen. We make an episode today, 5 years from now, assuming everything is going smoothly, those episodes will still be available for someone to download and listen to. And so the harm that I could do can persist for a good long time. The other thing is that a guest could decide, hey, I changed my mind. I don't want that episode up there anymore. Or whatever. Or they could claim that they're a co-owner of the episode. So there's a whole raft of possible problems that, let's be honest, they don't happen very often, but I've seen them happen where somebody says, hey, take that episode down. And if you're trying to do journalism, if there's a linearity to what you're doing, pulling that episode out of your feed might compromise your integrity as a journalist. I've seen that happen enough times to know it's the truth. So having a signed document that says I consent to you recording me and I consent to you publishing the recording. I don't have any right to approve or give you editorial notes, or maybe you do. You can put that in your agreement too. And you'll own what we create together as the sole owner of the copyright. Go forth with my blessing, and it's irrevocable. You've just taken care of 90% of the problems that a guest could ever create for a podcaster.
Yeah.
And it's a simple thing of having them sign this one-page thing or click yes on a form online.
Well, and I've seen a lot of release forms, and sometimes they it's like the side of a pharmaceutical drug insert. It's so long, and it's like, and most people, they get overwhelmed by it. And actually, you've made it so that it's short and sweet and covers a podcaster tremendously in many, many ways. And
it's a little walking a tightrope because people don't want to sign a big heavy legal document, but the document has to do its job as well.
Exactly.
So
it has to cover
something that people will actually.
Yeah, it does have to cover everything. And what I've had with the clients that my students that I coach in podcasting, they've come to me and they've said, okay, yes, I think that's a great idea. Because also they want to repurpose their podcast. They want to repurpose it for a blog or a chapter in a book or part of a course or something like that. But what they have come to me and said is, my guest doesn't want to sign this. Okay. And how do I make it more appealing for them to sign? And my I mean, always my retort is, number one, you're promoting that, you're promoting them and their product, their service, their book. If they're a coach, if they're a superstar, you're promoting them. So reiterate that. But also, I use with your form, the guest release form that Gordon has created. I have it in a format where I need to have someone's photo, the publicity or their headshot uploaded. I ask them questions in addition, like, what's your superpower? What points or what things would you really like in this interview for me to promote? What websites would you like? So in other words, it's not just, hey, sign this legal document, sign away all your rights, and
you're
then
showing them what the benefit for them is, along
Exactly.
with asking them to agree to these terms. And yeah, I mean, when you put a piece of paper in front of somebody with legalese on it and ask them to sign right on the spot, that's a confrontational kind of an approach. But it's, hey, you want to be on my show? Let's schedule the date. Here's what I need from you. Scroll through this, read this. If it's all okay, check the box. And that is a binding contractual agreement. So,
and it just makes it a little bit easier, like I said, when you have some other things in there and not just sign this. And also just making sure that they know that everybody that comes on the show goes through that process. It's not you're not spotlighting them in particular.
It's a little bit of finesse that's involved, but also, and I just had occasion to tell someone this today, is, look, it's the person who doesn't want to sign it who is the one who's going to be a problem later on. That's just a personality type thing. And you're probably better off, if they won't sign it, better off not interviewing them. I don't care if it's your father or your uncle.
Amen, brother. Amen. Amen. Amen.
And it's, if you view it as their law, I mean, look, yes, you want the guest, but they want the exposure that you're offering them. And so it's a quid pro quo, and they need to understand there's a trade-off. So it's a sign that you're being professional in your attitude about things. And that should give them confidence that you know what you're doing and you're serious about your business.
Exactly. Another aspect, and we're going to, is it okay in the show notes to put a link to
absolutely. Yeah.
Tell everybody, tell people about that guest release form that you've created. And it's a resource for people, for podcasters. I highly recommend that you get it.
It is absolutely free. You can go to podcastrelease.com. And as I was mentioning, there's a quid pro quo. You're trading something. When you get this from me, you're trading your email address. You're giving me your email address. So I can send you messages and tell you about other legal resources that I have that aren't free. But you don't have to read them. You don't have to listen. You can unsubscribe, but get the release and use it. It's a simple, easy way to protect yourself and cover your podcasting butt.
Well, and I like getting your little emails, because also you're updating and you're letting us know as well the things that you cover on the show, on your podcast show.
Right.
And these are subjects that can range. I mean, it's such a wide ranging amount of subjects that you cover, but they're all things that people, especially beginner podcasters, it's really important. And there's some veteran, there's some people that have been doing this for a very long time, and they're not aware of what they need and really to cover themselves. So I will definitely make sure that we have that link in the show notes. Again, the website that people want to go to is
podcastrelease.com.
You're so good. Nice and simple. I like it. I like that you keep it simple. And again, it's the release that Out of the Box with Christine uses. Yeah. And so it has to be good. So, okay.
I signed it.
Huh? And Gordon,
I signed it when you asked me to come on the show.
Gordon, the entertainment attorney, the podcast attorney extraordinaire, signed my guest release, and it's because he recognized it. Let's talk about some other legal aspects that podcasters need to be aware of. And I'm not certain if this is absolutely necessary or if you recommend it. I know we're not seeking legal advice per se or giving it on air, but trademarking. It's I've heard good things and like it can be a daunting process for people.
Yeah.
Should you trademark your podcast, the name of your podcast show?
Well, in true lawyerly fashion, I'm going to give the answer maybe. You know, if you have a distinctive, catchy title for your show that really sets you apart from the rest of the field of shows in your genre or just podcasts generally, it probably does make sense to protect it so that other people don't adopt names that are or titles that are confusingly similar to yours. Now that the caveat is it has to be a distinctive name. If you've got a show title that's a very descriptive term, it may not be entitled to trademark protection. We don't want to take words out of the lexicon.
Right.
Let's make the dictionary smaller by taking words out, right? So, and there are ways that you can adopt a name like that and then acquire the distinctiveness over time. I mean, what you see on my screen here, the podcast lawyer, is a very descriptive term that I am working to build as a brand for myself over time, because I want everybody to identify, oh, talking about podcast lawyer, you're talking about Gordon Firemark.
Yes.
That's acquiring that distinctiveness, that secondary meaning. But if you've got a great title that, catches everybody's attention right off, definitely want to register it, definitely want to protect that brand because it is a brand. And even if you aren't intending to make money from your podcasting enterprise, protecting that brand, it becomes an asset of your business. And that's another thing we should talk about is just, are you in business, and should you form a business entity of some sort?
Oh, we're getting there. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. So trademark it's an if. It is expensive. It's not a super simple, cheap thing to do. And it's a little tricky. It's not some people do it yourself. And I have training and things available to show people how to do it yourself. But it often means hiring a lawyer. So it's not for the faint of heart.
Yes, because it's extensive. The work that's involved in trademarking and trademark or patenting anything, but especially So possibly for the beginner or the hobbyist, right? Because there's a lot of hobbyist podcasters. Yeah. It may not be something that they need to do. Now, if you are building a large brand and the name of the podcast is part of that brand, part of if you have a community, hundreds of thousands of people in your Facebook group, and the brand, if it's something that can expand to merchandise and different media, then definitely it's worth, I would say, because you don't want 3 years down the road to see someone else that's taken that name and they're getting all of the people that you should be getting, all of the attention.
Yeah. The litmus test really is if somebody else came along and adopted the same name or something that's very close, maybe it's spelled differently but sounds the same or whatever, or if somebody came along and did that, would it hurt? If the answer is yes, then get a trademark, protect it so that you don't have to feel that pain.
Well, when the name of this show is it's out of the box. I put with Christine because you know how many out of the box podcast shows there are? Yeah. Out of the box, out of the box, out of the box, out of the box. There's hundreds of
them. So that's an example of one that probably isn't worth trying to protect, because there's all those others out there. You're never going to be able to knock them all off the pedestals, and some of them may have been in business, out there longer than you. And
yes,
so that's when we're building the brand around your name counts for a lot too.
Now let's talk about let's talk about the elephant in the room. A lot of people, right? A lot of people are jumping into podcasting thinking that they're going to make a lot of money. I don't want to dissuade anyone from getting into podcasting, okay, at all. But because they see the popularity and the success of podcasting, they're thinking that also they're going to be able to make a lot of money. Now, I know there are ways to use your podcast as a business tool, right? But let's talk about the business angle of podcasting, if you don't mind.
No, sure. Well, look, if making money is part of the goal for your podcasting enterprise, maybe the podcast is the business, Maybe it's a marketing initiative of a business. What's important is, I mean, I do think it's important to think of it in business terms.
Yes.
Even if you don't intend to make money directly from your podcast, it's there to do something for you, promote you as a brand, give you a voice and an opportunity to connect with more people and maybe sell them something else later on. Who knows what? So you've got to think about it in business terms. And if you are going to be monetizing in any way, having a company for the podcast is often a good idea. Again, if it's an initiative of another business, if it's a marketing arm of your company, then you don't need a separate company for the podcast. But it's not a bad idea to keep your podcast separately from your personal stuff, because if somebody does have a problem with what you're doing on the podcast, you don't want them to end up owning your house if they sue you.
Right.
And vice versa. If something happens in your private life, personal life, you don't want them to end up owning your business.
Correct.
So keeping things separate is often a good idea. That said, again, there's expense associated with it. There is a bit of a hassle factor. And if you're just in it as a hobby or hobbyist and dabbling and, just doing it to have a good time, then you don't bother with this necessarily. Maybe you look at getting some insurance or something like that. But, again, if you're going to treat your podcasting professionally, that is, with a professional attitude, then forming a business forming a company for the podcast business makes some sense. And again, you're going to want to talk to a tax advisor and a legal advisor just to make sure.
And there's different forms of there's S corp,
corporations and
LLC.
Limited liability companies. Yeah. And both of those, what an S corp is a designation of how you want the company to be taxed. That is, it passes through its income and losses to its owners directly. Whereas in a traditional corporation, the company pays taxes on its income first and then distributes what's left to the owners. That's why you have a conversation with your tax advisors about these things. But another advantage of having a company is that you may be able to see some tax deductions that an individual wouldn't, for perhaps buying some sound equipment, a microphone, a mixer, paying for your internet connection, the hosting services and things like that. Whereas if you're an individual, the government's going to look at it as a hobby and they're going to say, well, that's not a business expense.
Right.
You've got the business to support it, then it is. So I think, again, not for everybody, but for the folks who are thinking about it seriously as a profession or as an opportunity to make a little side hustle money, whatever, it's not a bad idea.
Well, and I like the different ways that people can generate income with their podcast. And that said, though, yes, they really either should be a business that is able to use podcasting as marketing. You can use your podcast as marketing, promotion or publicity as a tool. I do that myself. But from a listener standpoint and a radio head as myself, and also Gordon can tell you, do not make it an infomercial about you, because people will smell it, they'll hear it, they'll feel it, and they'll run away because nobody really wants to listen to any type of show where it's just constantly, let me tell you, let me sell you this, let me sell you that. Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, if you're listening to any traditional media production that is sponsored, that has advertisers, the ads are, 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there. And the rest of the time, it's just content. Let's face it, if you're using the advertising model, the content that you're creating is bait to attract audience so that you can give them those messages. So the bait has to be pretty compelling. If it's just ads all the time, they're not going to listen. I mean, people will browse through a catalog once in a while to see all the stuff they can buy. But most of the time, you got to give them valuable content so that they'll stick around and listen to that ad. That's what you're selling, is that ad inventory to your advertiser customers.
There's the ad inventory for those shows too. Also the shows that have quite a few listeners or downloads. For those people that are starting out and they don't have those numbers. Yeah. One thing you can do is similar to what Gordon does, right? Gordon has a podcast show that is also reiterating to the audience, hey, I'm an attorney, and I'm going to give you some tips and some ideas and concepts and things that you need to consider. Here's updates on the laws and all of that stuff. And at the same time, you Gordon, you're getting to introduce yourself to people, potential clients, potential future clients. And I'll say this too about especially podcasting and the video component of podcasting or vodcasting, YouTube. People, when they can see you and feel you and look into your eyes, the trust factor goes up 10 times. I mean, it's just, that's just how we are as human beings.
Well, and that's true of audio podcasting as well, is the ability just for people to hear the smile in your voice. If you smile in your voice, gives them a sense of comfort. I mean, it helps to have a good voice, but a sense of comfort, a sense of familiarity, the know, like, and trust factor. If you're a service provider or actually a maker of a product, having people know of your product and like you and trust you is the key to getting them to purchase what you're offering. And so, the other term for this is positioning, right? In marketing terms, you want to build these components of things to get your audience, your customer base interested, aware, and ultimately wanting to buy your products. So, yeah, I mean, I think I have a face made for radio, so audio is my chosen medium. But video.
No, but I love the video component of it, because for so long there's been people that I've listened to in radio and in podcasting, and of course, yes, it leaves a lot to the imagination because you're imagining, okay, whatever. But I love to see the expression, and and that's a new window that's opened up with YouTube as well. Do you want to talk about anything legal wise with YouTube? Because that's a whole
most of what I'm saying about podcasting and law applies just as well to YouTube. I mean, look, creating content is creating content. It's digital video is evergreen, like podcast content is. I think the main difference between video and audio is the way it's consumed. You can listen to an audio podcast in the car or while you're out doing, at the gym or whatever else. With video, it's a little bit of a lean forward experience. You're sitting at a desk or holding an iPad or something, and you're watching that video. It requires a different level of attention, which can be great if you're trying to convey some information or attract audience to see ads. But it's also, just you're commanding a different kind of attention in different ways. And I think it's a little harder to get people to sit through long form video than just
it is
a long commute on that podcast, right? So, but yeah, the general principles are the same. The one thing that we haven't talked about from a legal standpoint is respecting other people's stuff, content.
Yes,
copyright is, after all, it's at the root of everything we do as content creators. So, do you mind if we go there now?
Let's go there.
All right. So, let me give a very quick primer on how copyright law works, and it doesn't matter what country you're in. Most of the countries in the world have signed on to the International Copyright Law Treaty, which, covers the general protection of things. When an author, a person, creates something original and writes it down, records it, films it, paints it on canvas, carves it into a piece of stone, whatever, they're creating a work of authorship, and they, as the author, are the owner of the copyright in that. And that copyright basically says only that author has the right to make copies and make derivative things based on the original, to distribute those copies and derivatives, or to perform or display the work in public. So when you are making a podcast and you use something created by someone other than you are using copyrighted material or protected material under the copyright law. The most common area where this comes up, of course, is music. Right, you want to use that song as the intro to your show, or in the background while you're talking about a particular subject, or maybe you want to actually talk about that song as a critique or something like that. Well, guess what? Can't do that without the permission of the person who owns that copyright in the song. It gets trickier with music because not only do you have the songwriter who wrote the song.
You have the record
You
label.
have the artist that recorded it, and they were working for a record label, so the record company owns the recording copyright, and usually the songwriter or the music publishing company owns the composition copyright. So it's two different copyrights, and you gotta get two different licenses. So it gets very tricky very fast. So that's why you don't hear a lot of pop music in podcasts, because it's tricky, and you have to pay for the permission. So those licenses are hard to come by. But it comes up in other contexts. Even just a sound effect. Somebody creates a good sound effect, they may own a copy. They probably own a copyright in that. For YouTube on video, we see a lot of videos where they're incorporating other people's visual elements into things. It could even just a painting on the back wall when you're filming could bring on those kinds of risks. There are lots of exceptions and lots of variations when it's newsworthy or when you're only using a little bit for critique and commentary purposes and things like that. But no rules of thumb. You really do have to think about it every time you incorporate other people's stuff into your shows.
That's really, really important. That's so important that you talk about that, because again, I think it's kind of a little bit like the wild, wild west right now with podcasters. So in this flurry and excitement to have a podcast show and to start recording and publishing, people are not really thinking about all those different elements. And it's true. If I know for myself, if I have a guest on and I want to play a piece of material from them, either music or a video or something like that, a clip from a film, I always ask, and I get it in writing. I make sure, even if it's an email, is it okay to use this? And most of the time they're like, oh my gosh, yes, you're promoting me. Yeah.
The trick is,
but you do have to at least make sure that you reach out to them. And I probably should get some type of form for that.
Well, the trick is getting it from the right person, because often you have a recording artist come on your show and they say, yeah, sure, go ahead. Let's say you go ahead and use that song that I recorded. Well, they're not the record company, and they may not have been the songwriter who created the song, much less the publisher to whom the songwriter granted the copyright. So it's great. I mean, and usually when they're promoting their tour or their album or something like that, it's good for everybody, and you don't hear a lot of complaining about it. But it can happen, and especially with YouTube, with video, the algorithm will get you taken down even though you do have their permission.
Correct.
And then how do you tell YouTube I've got permission?
Exactly.
No, it's true. Got these strikes happening, and even if you do turn around and say, well, I actually had the artist on and he gave me permission, it accumulates, and music in particular is very challenging to use.
And people don't, and some people, they confuse radio with podcasting. They're like, well, radio stations get to play. Well, radio stations pay a service, and they have to keep track of the music that's played.
Right.
So
a lot of people don't know how things go on.
It's also not archived. Stations. You're not. Yeah, right. If you're a DJ, if you're someone that's at a station, you have to take meticulous notes about what's being played, when it's being played, and you're not allowed to have that on some type of website or server where people can download.
Yeah,
because
that's right. So in podcast, look, different medium, different rules. Bottom line. In broadcast radio, you've got an ephemeral signal going out over the waves. It's a performance of the work one time, and then you move on. And if you've paid for the licenses that they get from what we call the performing rights organizations, in the U.S., that's ASCAP and BMI and ZSAC and GMR. In other countries, different names and initials, but it's the same principle. These are companies that collect those royalties for those public performances. But when you're using music in a podcast, it's not ephemeral. So there's that stream happens once, and then that's a performance. But you've got the composition and the recording. Under American copyright law, there isn't a public performance right for sound recordings in broadcast, but in digital there is. So digital stream is another royalty-bearing transmission. But then it's also a downloadable
Correct.
file, and that's a copy. So you've invoked 2 or 3 of the rights that the author owns for each of the 2 kinds of works. So I say it's 4-stop shopping, whereas in broadcast radio it's 1-stop. Pay ASCAP and you're good to go. And yeah, you have to keep those logs and things. It's a different medium.
But also, too, then you're all when you're talking about a podcast, and if it's on YouTube, if you have a video companion to the podcast, it's on YouTube. You're talking about not just like, let's say, with a radio station broadcasting, let's say out of California in America, that your show is being heard and downloaded in, Yugoslavia, Ireland, all over the world. And so the potential for that it can be quite devastating.
Right.
So when it comes to music, just don't do it unless you're sitting there yourself on a keyboard or you're really talented. Don't do it.
I had a call earlier today where a fellow who had 30 years in radio as a broadcaster and has decided that he wants to create once every 2 weeks, he's going to do a 2-hour show where he features music from a particular genre, from a particular era that you don't hear much anymore, sort of, resurfacing some music. And he was asking me, well, who do I get to handle the licensing? And I said, you hire somebody full-time at a decent salary and maybe you get those licenses, but they're going to be on the phone calling all these publishers and labels all the time. There just isn't a blanket way to do it. And so I'm afraid I sort of talked him out of his great idea.
Well, and then people say, well, there's a workaround, right? So is there something, and I already know the answer to this, but I'm asking it anyway. Is there something where if a piece of music is so many years old, it's available or it's okay to use? In other words, if it's something that's 40 or 50 years old?
The number is 95 years.
95 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
So copyright law lasts for, there's two schemes. Again, I'm going U.S. law. Copyright protection prior to 1978 was under the law from 1909. Now that's before radio and before, records were around. But anyway, so the 1909 Copyright Act gave 28 years of copyright protection, renewable for another 28 years, and then when Congress started working on the new Copyright Act, they added an extension for another 19 years, take it out to a total of 75 years. Then right before the turn of the 2000 century, they added another 20 years to take it out to a total of 95 years of protection. Works that were created after that new law went into effect, January of 1978, last for the life of the author plus 70 years. So it's a good long time. Unless you die the day after you create the work, it's a good long time. So things that are in the public domain today are those things created prior to 1926, 95 years ago. So that's the answer to that question. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's necessarily old enough. You know what I'm saying? But there are other aspects of this. Sound recordings weren't covered under federal statutory copyright law until 1972. So pre-1972 sound recordings may or may not be in the public domain. There are a bunch of lawsuits that have been brewing now for the last few years, dealing with pop acts from the 50s and 60s claiming, well, there's a state level protection. So it gets messy really fast and just, yeah.
So what do you recommend, Gordon, for someone who is who's creating a podcast and they don't want to come in dry and just go, hey, they do need some kind of music.
Tops and bottoms and bumpers and those kinds of things.
Yeah. What do you recommend?
I would say there are a number of good music libraries out there where you can buy licenses for on a one payment kind of a thing. Buy it, use it, and you're good to go forever, no royalties. There are some services that are subscription where you pay them a monthly fee and then you have access to all the music that's in their catalog as long as you keep your subscription going. And even after you end your subscription, the stuff that's incorporated into episodes remains grandfathered in and protected. I think those are great solutions, but they don't have all the music you're going to want. You're not going to get the big pop top 40 hits
No,
in
because
those
it's
in those
owned by
catalogs.
somebody. It's owned by Britney Spears.
Well,
Well,
or
Britney Spears doesn't
Sony,
even own it. Oh.
right, right. Sony Music and Warner Music and Universal Music, those are the companies that own these things. So that library music and those subscription service music is a great solution. If you're looking for an opening and a close for your show, maybe find an artist and hire them to create something for you and get a contract that says you own it and you're free to do it.
I use and I've actually been very happy with it, is Shutterstock.
Yeah.
And Shutterstock has super high quality music.
Yeah.
And it's easy to search. So if you want like something country sounding, you want jazzy, you want ambient, you want scary.
Yeah.
Their library is actually very easy to choose, and it's super affordable.
Yeah.
Like for the beginner podcaster, I believe it's super affordable. And I'll say to people, because a lot of podcasters are like, they're trying to save money, right? So they want a free hosting platform, they want free music. And I'm like, just spend a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Just spend
There's
a
no
little
such thing
bit
as
of
a free
money.
lunch, right?
No, but just spend a little bit of money, especially on things when it involves sound as well, and carrying your show. A lot of people think, they don't realize that if you have something that's free hosting your show, all those stats, all that information is not necessarily going to be yours either. I've dealt with this. I won't name the name that will not come from my lips. But I've had quite a few clients, podcast coaching clients, and they're like, I can't get my shows. I don't know what my stats are. And I said, you either have to see if you can transfer them. If there's a way to transfer them to a new podcast hosting platform that you pay, or start all over.
Yep. Well, they're either heads in the clouds or chained to the bottom of the sea, right? So
yeah. But yes, it's worth it. It really is. It's absolutely worth it to
definitely. I mean, a small investment on the front end of things is worthwhile for the security and knowledge that you create what you own, what you're creating, you will own, and you can protect it. And that's the other side of copyright, real quick, Christine, is when you create your podcast episode, you own the copyright in that episode until and unless you give it to somebody else, granting a right to somebody else. And when you make these deals with these hosting companies, you got to be careful about what rights you're granting and what you're retaining for yourself.
Read the fine print.
Indeed.
Read the fine print. It's really, really important. Like I said, when somebody comes to me and says, but it's free, I said, no, it's not. They're getting money out of you somehow.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely.
Gordon, we have a couple minutes left, and I just wanted to know if there was anything else that you wanted to cover and make sure that you got out to our listeners and our viewers.
Well, I just want to invite anybody who is getting into the podcasting game and is sort of, not sort of, if you're serious about it, if you want to have a professional approach to things, again, whether it's about making money or just being professional in the way you approach it, I'd like to invite you to join my private Facebook group called Legit Podcast Pro. And there's more information about that at legitpodcastpro.com. Of course, I want you to use that release form from podcastrelease.com and, just find out about me. You can look me up on most of the interwebs. My name is Gordon Firemark. That's Firemark. And I'm very fortunate to have a name that isn't a very popular one. I'm only a handful of us out there.
Exactly. Or you can also just Google the podcast lawyer, and Gordon will pop up all over the place. And also I encourage people to listen to your podcast as well. I'll have links. You just let me know, and I'll put links in the show notes on the audio version and as well on the video version of the show, so that people can find you. And yes, folks, take advantage of the free offer of getting a professional guest release form. It will save you so much time and frustration and possibly money in the long run. And it's actually something that is just good to cover your butt. So we'll have all of those details in the show notes. And I want to thank you again, Gordon, so much. You're welcome back anytime to talk to our listeners and viewers. And I hope we get to see you again on Out of the Box.
Well, I would love that. Thank you, Christine. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, love. And thank you, wonderful listeners and viewers, for tuning in today. Remember, if you want more information about this podcast show, you can go to outoftheboxwithchristine.com. If you want more information about me, it's christineblosdale.com. All those links will be in the show notes. And subscribe to this channel, share it with friends. If also something that Gordon was talking about you think is important for someone that you know who's starting a podcast, and you want to make sure that they're covered, send them the show. I think it's going to be it's an amazing opportunity for people to get to know Gordon Firemark, my new friend. Thank you again. And as I always say, remember to think outside of that damn box. Bye for now.